Hey everyone, I'm Coach Chippys and I've been a professional top laner or head coach for the past 8 years. During this time I've reached Worlds and MSI multiple times. Now I'm a full-time coach with a ton of passion towards helping players unlock their potential and climb to their dream rank. Hey everyone, today we're going to be covering everything you need to know about warding in League of Legends as a top laner. We'll be covering everything from the level 1s to the mid game to the late game, and just going in detail about where you should be putting your wards and the reasoning behind each one. And if you're a player that hates getting ganked or hates getting killed in the side lane, then this video is going to be absolutely perfect for you. We'll start off by covering level 1 wards, because these are some of the most important wards you need to know as a top laner, and it's very overlooked. I see so many players just autopiloting from the start of the game, and they're not thinking with intention about where they can place this ward that have the highest impact. They normally just play out their lane, and then they drop their ward when they're feeling unsafe, but they can be planning that ahead of time. And one of the best wards to be placing level 1 is actually the ward here, where it shows basically deep in the river, and it'll show you if anyone's approaching from either of these angles, and it'll also show if someone is looking to cross to invade. So this one ward covers so many entrances, and the reason you want to be placing it at around 110 to 120 is because you get the maximum amount of use out of it, because of course a level 1, a ward only lasts 90 seconds, so if you place it at 40 seconds, run out of base and drop it, it's going to expire before you're really in danger. Because a lot of the 3-camp junglers, Rek'Sai, Lee Sin, and Elise, they're looking to get a lot of work done at around 225, 230, and if you have this ward here early, it's still going to be there at that timer. And they're either going to give up looking for you, or go somewhere else, or go back to farming. So if you ever verse champions Rek'Sai, Elise, Lee Sin, I definitely recommend this ward. But there's something you should know before you place it. Is on red side. If you actually run from base here as fast as you can, and you leave this bush, you can see if your lane opponent enters this bush level 1. And the reason that's important is if they're there level 1 and you walk to get this ward, they could either cheese you, go on you, or they even just see your ward in the first place, ping it out for their jungler, and now all of a sudden the jungler knows where your ward is, he might look to gank you around the back. However, if you're on blue side, you can basically run and take over this bush level 1, and it's very hard for them to be able to spot you. No one's going to be sitting in this dot bush at 120. Very, very rarely they're going to see your ward. So on blue side, this ward's a lot easier to do, but you can still do it on red side as long as you rush level 1 and see where your lane opponent is standing. And another huge benefit of this ward that we briefly touched on is if the enemy jungler is playing a champion that can invade. So if he's playing Graves, Lee Sin, Kindred, champs that can easily clear the Baron wall, he may even start red and cross to blue and then invade your jungler and look to kill him on it. Especially if your jungler is playing something like Fiddlesticks or Hecarim, who ideally wants to get all of their camps farmed without anything bad happening. If you fail to place this ward and your jungler gets killed by the enemy jungler, it's going to have a huge negative impact in the game. And even the reverse, where if your jungler is looking to invade as well and you have this ward here, you can see if the enemy top laner has placed this ward as well, which gives your jungler more information to be aggressive with his invade. Now that you're aware of the strengths of this ward, it's time to touch on the weaknesses. And this ward has two main weaknesses. The first one being, is if you're versus a full clear jungler, it can be quite ineffective. Because most full clear junglers finish their clear between 3 minutes and 3:10, and then they're going to look to get a gank off before their crab spawns. However, if you place this ward at 120, of course the last 90 seconds at level 1, it's going to run out around 250, and then you're going to be in prime position to get ganked or pressured at the end of their efficient clear. So let's say you versus a Hecarim, and he starts red with a leash, clears these 3 camps, and does Wolves Blue Gromp. It's around 305 for him. Then he can just look to pop Ghost and run up the river and gank you as your ward has expired a few seconds ago, and you could feel like you were safe because you had the ward there the whole time, but just as it expires really is the window where he's going to gank you, which can be quite annoying. So the way to remedy this is if you verse a full clear jungler, you want to look toward at around 220. After you've done a wave or, 1 or 2 waves, you can look toward then. And then by the time he's finished his clear and he looks to gank you, then you're going to be fine. And if he chooses to gank you early, it's going to be for 2 reasons. Either you're a free kill or he made a mistake. Because if he's running to gank you and you're not a kill and he's a champion like Hecarim, where ideally Hecarim wants even to do 2 points in Q, if he skills E level 3 and ganks you, pops his ghost and doesn't even kill you or really impact the lane in any way, he's going to be very far behind in his clear time, which is not how he wants to be playing as champion. So for the most part, these full clear junglers will only really look to gank you if you're a freebie. So as long as you're not playing super disrespectfully just because you're versus a full clear jungler, you should be alive. Of course, also if you're warding at 220 and you see them coming, there's just no way you should be able to die to them. Now the second weakness of this ward is that it doesn't really cover getting ganked from around the back, which can be quite frustrating. So if you're in a matchup where you're going to be doing a lot of heavy trading, let's say Riven Aurelia, Jax Fiora, some heavy action going on in the top lane, you could actually ask one of your teammates to ward this bush for you, or even this bush for you, and then that will basically cover all entrances and you'll be very, very hard to gank. Now the next ward you need to know about is the Tri-Bush ward. And it's important to note that before you put this ward down, you actually walk into this bush level 1 and take it over. Because if your lane opponent is in there and clears it, or even if he doesn't clear it, if he just pings it out, now all of a sudden the enemy jungler knows where your only ward is, he can do his 3 camps, jump this wall, and it's going to be very, very hard for you to play the game. However, of course, if you're to walk into this bush level 1 and your lane opponent's there and he just beats you to death, you don't want to be doing that. However, in matchups like that where they just beat you level 1, they're probably going to get pushed anyway, which means this ward is useless. So in matchups where you want to be looking to get push and you're stronger than your lane opponent level 1, which should go hand in hand, then you should be looking to walk into this bush, check if he's in there. If he's in there, beat him up a bit. If he's not, get that ward down level 1. And this ward has a ton of uses. For example, if you take over this bush and get this ward down, and your lane opponent is pushing in a matchup where you're stronger than him, now all of a sudden you can look to flank him level 1 as the minions settle and get a very, very good trade. The next use of it is versus champions with a very strong level 2. So let's say Jarvan, let's say Xin Zhao, they can just do red buff, and then run straight through your try and look to gank you if you don't have this ward. And it's also good versus level 3 junglers, of course, Rek'Sai, Elise, Lee Sin, you'll spot them out as well. However, it has another use that I don't see touched on a lot, is that you can actually use it aggressively to see your lane opponent's ward. Because if you put your ward down there level 1, and you see him do the same thing, and your red side, for example, now all of a sudden your jungler, who might have looked to do a 1 camp or a 3 camp, he will see your enemy's ward, because you're spotted on your ward. Which means then, now that he sees where the only ward is, he can of course do the reverse of what we talked about. He can jump this wall and look to punish him as well. Now, especially if you're blue side and you're standing in this bush and you ward this bush level 1, you can see where your lane opponent wards, and the same for the reverse, where if you can ward this one and stand in here, as long as you spot your lane opponent's ward, it's very, very easy for your jungler to play, because you only have 1 ward until around 4 minutes, unless you have Cosmic Insight. We'll touch on that later, but for the most part you only have 1 ward early game, so if you show your jungler exactly where that is, he can look for aggressive opportunities. And the final level 1 ward you need to know about is the ward in the enemy jungle. And you've probably seen a lot of other players or even streamers ward here level 1 to see which buff the enemy jungle is starting. But you can be taking this the next step further, and especially if you're climbing higher ranks, I definitely recommend you taking this the next level, where you want to be invading with your team ideally. You'll be pinging them before the gates drop level 1, come with me, attack, and they will most likely follow you into battle. Now while you're in this jungle, you can look to ward either here or here. And I recommend the Raptors one, but both are fine. And the reason you'll be warding these 2 spots instead of this one is because if the enemy jungler is playing a champion which can start Raptors well, or farms Raptors well, and has a strong level 3 gank, so let's say for example Maokai or Sejuani, then you can be in a lot of trouble. Because this ward gives very little vision. It'll show around this radius, where he can actually pull the red level 1, to this bush and clear it out of vision. And the reason that's a problem is because after the red, you don't see which way he is going. If he goes down to up to Krugs and then clears down, he's just doing a normal full clear and you can play aggressively. But if he goes down to Raptors, there's a good chance he goes from Raptors back to Krugs and then looks to punish you if you're playing aggressively. Which can be quite frustrating, because if you were to just ward it better, level 1, you'd be able to play your lane exactly the way you want it, depending on what the enemy jungler is doing. Because if you ward this level 1, and he starts Raptors, you know, okay, he's going to be level 3 at around 230 from doing his 3 camps up, then I have to respect on that timer. Or if he does red and then goes to Raptors, you'll literally see if he walks down back through his wolves, or if he walks around back to his Krugs, and you can play accordingly to that information as well. However, if your team doesn't want to get stuck in with your level 1, or if your level 1 is just weaker in general, then you could always look toward here. However, I recommend in that case, if you're going to be looking to play aggressively and your team can't help you take over that jungle, then of course to just ward the try. And if you're on red side, it's a lot easier to verse because they don't have that option of course, going Raptors and up. They're not going to start wolves for the most part. In this situation, you can just ward here, which shows the Gromp and the blue buff, and you can use that information accordingly. So to recap, for red side wards, this one can be very strong at 115 to 120 versus early pressure junglers if you want to be looking to play aggressive in your lane. And then you can place that same ward at around 220 to 230 versus full clear junglers if you want to be playing the same way. And then also if you want to be warding the enemy jungle to see where he starts and use that information accordingly, you can look to ward here. And for the wards on blue side, you want to be looking to ward try level 1 for the same reason if you're versus an early pressure jungler, and also you want to be looking to play aggressive in your lane, and you can place this ward later as well versus full clearers. And then on the blue side, if you want to be warding the enemy jungle, you want to be ideally taking it over with your team and warding over here or here, and then being able to use that information to play more aggressively in your lane. Now, as for unique ward placements, there's one very important ward you need to know about, and that is being able to place the ward through this wall by glitching the terrain, basically. And the way you do that is by standing here between this gap of the rock and the ledge, and then you want to be having your mouse around the tip of this tree. However, it's important for you to note that you need to be centering your camera before you do this to have a higher success rate. So before I look to do it, I'll of course hold spacebar to center my screen, put my mouse on the tip of this tree leaf, the side part, and then the ward should go on that bush. And by doing so, I see if the enemy jungler is waiting there for me, and this is very important because after your lane opponent crashes a big wave, the wave is going to bounce back towards him. And if his jungler is looking to punish you, then you're going to be pushing here, you're going to be laning, and then you're going to feel unsafe. You're going to walk toward this bush and get ganked by the jungler. But if you were to have warded it before the start of your stack, if you were to ward it by glitching it through the wall, you see him in there, now all of a sudden you know he's there and you can play your lane accordingly. Our next topic is going to be ward timings, and what I mean by that specifically is the cooldown in which a ward is going to come back to you and the timing in which you want to be using it. So to give an example, based on our level 1 wards we just covered, if you verse a full clear jungler, you want to be warding it around 2:30, and since your ward expires after 90 seconds, that means at 4 minutes your ward will expire. However, that's exactly when you get your second ward, so you can easily replace it and keep yourself safe for another 90 seconds as long as you're versing a full clear jungler that's most likely going to play in a way you anticipate. Now it's important to note, just because you get your second ward at 4 minutes doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be placing it on spawn. There are a lot of times where you want to be holding it because, as you see, you don't get your third ward until 7 minutes 20, which means if you waste your ward, it's going to be very, very punishing. And it's important to note, if you place it at 4 minutes on the spawn, it's going to expire at around 5:30, which is around when top laners get level 6. So if you're playing a top laner with a very level 6 all-in, let's say you're playing a Rally or Riven or even Malphite, we're going to look to kill your lane at 6, and you place your ward at 4 minutes, now your ward's expired just as you're looking to kill your lane opponent, which is of course very risky because now you have no idea what's going on. So it's important to be aware of what the jungler's doing before you place your second ward, and of course by that point in the game they would have most likely done something in the game, and then you can learn what their next move will be based on that information. So for example, once he's ganked, you're probably going to know where he started, because if he started top and he ganks bot, and he's got 24 CS, he's of course full cleared and gank bot. So from that knowledge, you know he's full clearing down, and let's say he's blue side, his next Gromp is going to spawn at around 4:10 to 4:15. So in that situation, you will probably need to ward top early at around 4 or 5, 4:10 if you're going to be playing aggressively, because he's going to come out of base to farm his camps again, and if you're playing really aggressively top with no vision, he's going to of course gank you. But if you've got your ward in place, you're playing aggressively, and you disrupt him, if he chooses to try gank you instead of farming his camps, and you waste his time, that can be very good for the game state. However, if he is clearing up, for example, and he tries to gank you at the end of his first full clear, but you warded level 1 like a good boy and you didn't get punished from it, you now know he's going to be going bot for his Krugs at around 4:10, which means you don't need to be placing your ward at 4 minutes, because he's not going to be around top until around 5, 5:15, 5:20, and by that time you could have your ward down to, let's say, 5, and then you're going to see him coming, and you're going to have an extra minute on your ward of safety that you wouldn't have if you just placed it at 4 on the dot. Now it's important to note, you can't always ward relative to what the enemy jungler's pathing looks like, because there'll be a lot of junglers you verse, especially in lower elo brackets, that are just playing perma ganking style, and they don't want to be farming their camps at all if they see opportunities to gank. And in those situations, when you verse those sorts of champs or those kinds of players, you're going to be warding relative to what your wave is doing in advance. So let's say, for example, that your lane opponent crashes a big wave onto your tower, you know it's going to be bouncing back to him, and you're going to be slow pushing it, and eventually it'll be in a position where you're gankable. So in that situation, you want to be warding before it gets to that danger point, because when the enemy jungler sees you're slow pushing a wave outside your tower, he's going to think, alright, I'll try to get top in around 30 seconds and punish this guy. But if you've already got your ward down before that point, let's say after the first wave of your slow push, you dip in to try and get a ward down in the river, then you're going to have a lot more situation where you see him coming. But if you were to just get the wave slow pushing to him, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I feel vulnerable now, and you walk into the river, by that point it's too late, he's most likely going to have you ganked by then. So it is good to play around the enemy jungler's path, because most junglers will of course want to eat their jungle camps relative to which way they're spawning. Even if they're not full clearing them, they'll still want to farm them in some degree. However, there are some players you verse that just play completely psychopathic, and in that situation you need to be warding accordingly to what your wave is doing, not so much what they're doing, because they're too hard to predict. Moving on to the third ward, I want every top laner watching right now to take accountability and view Rift Herald as your responsibility, because this ward that you're getting at 720, of course Rift Herald spawns at 8, this ward should be used primarily for the Rift Herald, because this objective is a huge way to influence the game early game as a top laner, because it's the objective closest to you. So if you have a ward on it and you see the enemy jungler trying to contest it, now your jungler has a lot of information that he can use. He can either contest it with you, you can look for a fight, look to get the herald off of him, or he can look to dive bot, which is very crucial, because if the mid laner also sees it as well, he can be a part of that play. He can see the jungler is not going to counter gank this, so even if I give 6 creeps mid for a dive bot, it's probably going to be worth it, and you can look for a 4-man dive bot play, or even the jungler can just go for a 3-man. There's a lot of opportunities to blow open the game through bot. And even if there is no chance to gank bot, then you know you can look to punish the hero. You can look to fight the herald and take it off him. Or the worst case scenario where the enemy jungler just eats the enemy jungler's, bot camps, there's always going to be something to be gained from seeing if the enemy jungler is trying to do herald or not. Because I see so many games, especially amongst my students, where they're winning their lane, they've gotten a lot of solo kills, and the enemy jungler just walks up and solos herald at the end of its full clear, and they don't really think much about it until I bring it up that you should have been warding this at not at 720, but with your 720 ward, and this information is crucial for how the game plays out. Because if you were to place a ward there and see it, your jungler has so many options about how to impact the game, but if the enemy jungler just sneaks it around the time and your jungler doesn't know, then there's very, very little he can do about it. Now, there's no specific best time to place this Herald ward down, it's just whenever you can, before 8 minutes. It's important to get it down before 8 because there are a lot of junglers that will just try to solo it on spawn. Primarily champions such as Yi or Shyvana, whose ganks are so weak, they don't really have anything else to do, they might as well farm this huge objective and look to blow open the game with it. And there are a lot of matchups where you won't be getting push, and in that situation it might be important to ward it early, around 7:30, because if they're stacking a huge wave, it's about to crash onto your tower at 7:40, 7:45, now all of a sudden you're farming this wave onto your tower and you can't get the Herald ward down, and by the time you finally get it down at 8:30, then the Herald is just gone and your jungler has no options. And the situation where you're not going to want to ward the Herald is when your jungler is clearly playing for it. He's pinging it, he's pathing towards it, he's of course going to try to start it on spawn and fight it with you, and in that situation it's better to ward the enemy jungle so you have as much information as you can use before you start this Herald fight. And you can see if their support is coming, or if anyone is really getting a part of this fight that shouldn't be, and then use that information accordingly. And as for the last two wards, you should know by this point in the game, around 10 to 13 minutes, if you're going to be playing to break their tower or if they're playing to break yours. And if you're trying to break theirs, then it's good to ward the enemy jungle with one moment of your push, and then you can see if the enemy jungler is farming or trying to punish you from breaking his top laner's plates. And then if the enemy top laner is beating you, then you want to be warding defensively, either in your try or by your Krugs, or if you're on blue side, warding your blue side jungle over the wall, and just seeing if they're looking to dive you and help their top laner get plates as well. Now, as for the ward timings with Cosmic Insight, there are a few differences this rune can bring, and if you're versing someone that has it, now all of a sudden they're going to be warding around 20 to 30 seconds before you for their second ward, and that information is very important to give your jungler. Of course, you don't type, they have Cosmic Insight, watch out. You be aware of that timer, 3:38, and you see where they go to place their ward, and now you can ping it out for your jungler accordingly ahead of time, and he can look to avoid it or use that information however he wants. And it's important to note, they don't get baited by getting a ward at 6:35 and just dropping it for your laning, dropping it for ganks, because this is still your Herald ward. You're not getting your next one till 9:22, so you need to be keeping this in mind when you run Cosmic Insight, because of course I made that mistake before, where I've got a ward up at around 6:30 and I just drop it to survive ganks, because in my mind I know the 7:15, 7:20 ward, that is my Herald ward, but it took me a little bit of time to adjust to a 6:30 one, so don't get baited, don't drop it prematurely and lose Herald because of it. Keep that in mind, but it's very important when versing someone with Cosmic Insight that you be aware of these timings, and you can give your jungler that information accordingly by pinging where their ward is going. Up next, we're going to be covering warding with intention, and this skill is very important for you to improve upon, because if you don't, even if you're placing your wards in the correct location at the correct timing, if you don't truly understand your intention in the game, you're still going to get punished. So to give an example of that, let's say you're playing a champion that has a very strong level 6, but before that point you are losing your matchup, and you're thinking in your mind, okay, at level 6, I'm going to all in this guy. So at that point, your intention is to all in your lane opponent at 6. So let's say he's pushing you under tower before that point, and he pushes the 5:30 cannon wave, which from that wave, if you haven't got level 6 already, you can get level 6 at the 5:05 normal wave if you've gotten every single bit of XP, but that's not going to happen in a lot of games. So let's say, for example, you've lost an XP or two, and you're going to get level 6 at the 5:30 cannon wave. So if you have that in your mind, I'm going to get level 6 on this wave, I'm going to all in him, your warding should match your intention. So if you were to do that, you're going to be all inning him around this area of your lane, then where should you be warding? Your intention is to all in him here. Which ward will keep you the most safe? And the answer to that question is a lane ward. So before the wave gets to that point when he's pushing it in, you could look toward this bush by standing in here, or even if he's pushing it down here and you can't get it in that second bush, you could even sneak a ward in here by, laning back and forwards, making it not look obvious. You can sneak a ward in there, and now you see if the enemy jungler is aware of your intention. He knows you're playing Aurelia or Maud or whatever, a champion with a strong level 6, and you're going to look to all in, and now he's going to be camping in the bush waiting for you to do that and punish you accordingly. But if you were aware of your intention before that point and your ward matched your intention, you'd see him coming and you'd know, okay, I'll wait for this guy to recall before I truly look to punish this guy with my ulti spike. Now, as for how to improve upon the skill of warding with intention, there are two main ways to do so. First one being is you should pre-plan your wards ahead of time, and the level 1 ward is the easiest because once you've seen all your champions locked in and champ select, you have so much time to plan ahead. You have to wait for the lane screen to start, the loading screen to finish, wait for minions to spawn. You have so much time to think about your matchup, how it should go, and relative to the junglers, what they're doing, and then use your level 1 to help with your intention. If you're playing aggressively, you should know where to ward and corresponds to that. If you're playing defensively, then your ward will most likely be defensive as well. And as for the other wards, it's a bit tougher because you have less prep time, but essentially as you're coming out of base, you should be thinking, where do I want to be using my next ward? How do I want to be playing? What's my wave say right now? Just thinking ahead of time about how you're going to be playing your lane out as you go back to it, and then using that ward to help with your intention of how you're going to be playing that lane out. And the second way to improve upon the skill, and in my opinion the easiest, will be to review your games. You should be either watching your games through the client or some sort of replay program. It doesn't really matter, but you should be watching your games back and seeing every time you place a ward and thinking, what was I thinking about in the game when I placed this ward? What was my intention behind it? And if you're just placing your wards without thinking, then of course you need to be applying the first one. You need to be planning your ward ahead of time. But if you're thinking about it and you're placing it, now you can start to see, okay, I placed this for this reason, but my reasoning was wrong. Next time I'll use this information to make a better decision. Basically, you'll learn from your mistakes if you're getting punished for these bad wards, and then you'll see a situation, especially if you watch through the client, you can see what the enemy jungler is doing. So if you place your ward in a position where he can't gank you, and he's aware of that and he doesn't even try to go near your lane, then you can think, okay, that ward was good, I can look to do that again in the future. But basically, through reviewing every single ward you place, you can see what works and what doesn't, and learn from it, and then you'll be better in your future games. Up next, we're going to be covering pink wards, and for now, I'm going to stay primarily in the early game, and we'll cover the mid game later on, but for now, it's important to know the two main reasons you're going to be pinking in the early game. And the first reason is, of course, the ward will last longer than a normal ward as long as no one finds it, because a normal ward lasts 90 seconds, but a pink ward will last indefinitely as long as no one can find it. So with that information in mind, you should be trying to place it in locations that are hard to people to spot them, because I see a lot of players, they just crash their wave under tower, and then they just pink ward this, which it can be a good ward if your jungler is looking to dive your lane opponent with you, because then you can clear his ward and your jungler has a higher chance of being unspotted. However, if you're just warding it for the sake of warding it, then it's not going to be as effective as trying to sneak a ward in his jungle, either here or here, because especially this bush here, I see very rarely will junglers check this because they're just trying to farm and gank as fast as possible. They don't want to be checking every single bush along the way. So if you want this one, you'll see them every time they cross back and forth through this path. And if you want the Krugs, you'll see them every time they do Krugs. However, the Krug ward will get spotted a bit more often. However, in lower brackets, there are a lot of junglers that won't even check that bush, and you'll see them for 2 or 3 Krug spawns. And other than these two bushes, there is another good spot for a pink ward, and that is this bush. And I would recommend this one in 2 scenarios. One where either this bush or this bush, sorry, and 2 scenarios where your lane is pretty self-sufficient. You won't really need the extra vision for yourself for surviving a gank. Let's say you're Jax and you're versus a Yi jungle and, I don't know, a Na top, for example. It's very low chance you're going to die to a gank unless you're playing psychotically. Very crazy. But if you're to ward here or here for your mid laner, and these wards also help you as well in some degree, but these also help your mid laner as well, because they'll see every time he's going past Raptors to look to gank mid from this side, and you're basically protecting your mid laner from any ganks from this side of the map. However, I don't do this ward this often because a lot of jungle top scenarios you will be punishable by ganks. It's just something to keep in mind if you feel very, very safe and let's say you're 2-0, there's a very low chance you get ganked, then you can be using your warding for your jungler. However, for the most part, you will be looking to ward the enemy jungle or warding for yourself with your pink. That's just something to keep in mind. Now, as for defensive pinks, of course the rule still applies where you don't want it to be cleared, so if you just place it in here for the sake of surviving a gank, and your lane opponent's smart, he is just going to walk in and clear it, and you've essentially wasted money. However, if you think about you have a good chance of being dived, or if you're going to get ganked from Rek'Sai jumping this wall, for example, then you could actually look to pink this bush, and this pink will last a very, very long time, because it's not very often that a jungler will cross into this area unless he's looking to kill you, which means if he crosses into this area and clears your pink, of course it saved your life, it has served its purpose. But if you put in an area here or here, when your lane opponent gets pushed and he can easily check in and clear it, it's going to be essentially wasted. And there are some scenarios actually where you can sneak a pink in a lane bush, although it's very rare. It's just something to keep in mind where if you get back to lane and your lane opponent doesn't see you, he hasn't seen you've bought a pink yet, and you can sneak into this bush with the wave coming back towards you, sneak a pink in here, and there's a good chance your lane opponent, depending on what champ he's playing, he might not check that bush, and then you'll be able to spot a jungler coming in for lane ganks. But for the most part, if he's stacking big waves under you and you're scared of being dived, I'd recommend warding here. But if he's stacking big waves against you and there's very, very little threat of you being dived, but you're not look to be playing aggressive soon, then you can look to sneak your pink ward here. And as forwarding Herald with your pink, I don't recommend it. I always recommend using yellow over pink, because of course if the jungler walks into Herald and sees the pink, he's just going to clear it. But if you were to have yellowed the back of the pit, and he walks in, he's not going to see it. And even if he walks in with Sweeper, there's still a chance he doesn't see it. And that chance of him doing Herald, thinking he's unseen but being spotted the whole time, makes him higher chance of being punished, makes Spot higher chance of getting punished, and it's a much better scenario for you overall, even though in theory, if he plays very, very well, he will walk in with Sweeper, sweep the whole pit and clear it. It's still better for you to have that chance of being able to blow open the game without him knowing about it. So to recap, if you're pushing your lane and looking to play for tower plays and tempo, you want to be pinking over here or here. If you're pushing your lane and looking to dive them with your jungler, you want to be warding here and making sure you put it at the edge of the bush so you can cancel any wards that they put over this wall. And if you're playing for a bounce back and allowing your jungler to gank them when the lane is near your tower, then you want to be pinking here. And that one's a bit more risky because it's easier for them to clear it if your jungler doesn't come, but if that's the way you're playing, then this is the best pink for the job. And if you're playing defensively on blue side and you're scared of being dived by their jungler, then you want to be putting your pink ward here. And to recap on red side, there are less good options available, but if you're playing aggressively, you're going to be pinking either this bush or this one, depending on how much control you have of the lane. And if you're playing more defensively, you'll be pinking either the try or the golem bush. And the times I'd want the try are basically when you're versus somebody that's not going to be checking it, someone that doesn't really care about the vision game, they play more for just trading, or in a situation where if they go for your pink, you can stop them, but that's pretty rare if they're crashing big waves onto your tower. So I'd only really pink that if you're versing someone that's not really checking these bushes at all and not playing for vision. And then if they are playing for vision, you just pink what the Krug bush and you can spot any dives or if the jungler tries to jump this wall and he's looking to pressure you. And then, of course, we have the lane ward, where if you're going to be playing aggressively soon, let's say you're going to be getting level 6 on a stack here, and you're going to be all-inning your lane opponent, then of course you can look to pink one of the lane bushes and spot out the enemy jungler if he's going to be lane ganking you. But you should always be doing that one ahead of time. Up next, we're going to be covering warding in the mid game, and there are a lot of variables that go into this, mainly around which champion you're playing and how the game state is going, but I will go through each of them one by one. So let's say, for example, you're playing a strong side laning champion, such as Tryndamere, Jax, or Fiora, and both of these tier 1s are down. On these champions, you're going to be wanting to push your wave under the enemy tower, keep them trapped, and then you want to be using your wards to take over the enemy jungle. That is your job in the mid game, is to keep your lane opponent trapped under tower and fog between the lanes. So to fog, you need to have full control of their jungle, because if you fog into a jungle you can't see, of course you're just going to die. So the way to take over the jungle is by pinking here, so you have full vision of these entrances, and then you'll be using your green ward either here or here, depending on how much control you have. Because the problem with this bush here is it's the easiest ward for them to clear in the game, because any ranged champion can basically stand here and clear it for free, which is why you don't pink it as well. You don't want your pink to get cleared. So you'll be using your green in either this bush or this bush, depending on how it's going. And your pink bush, your pink ward should always be around here, like we covered earlier, because this is the hardest for them to clear, because if you're fogging between the lanes, you can always go onto them, and they'll need to send basically a small army to stop you, and then you're doing your job, you're drawing pressure. And in the scenario where you're losing side lane, regardless of what champion you're on, even if you're Fiora or on, it doesn't matter. If you're stuck under this tower here by your lane opponent, if he's doing the correct steps, keeping you pinned, then you want to be using your wards to control the jungle. So ideally you'd have a pink ward here, and then you could use to get your green ward around here. Because the reason you want it here, it's because a lot of top laners, when they're pinning and fogging on red side, they're keeping you stuck under this tower. They're going to head into this bush to remain unseen while they wait for the next wave if they can't push to the tower. So if you have a green ward here and a pink ward by the blue buff, then it's very easy for your team to see what your lane opponent is doing and give you resources if there's a chance to kill them. And in the scenario where you can't kill him, just the fact that you've got this full area of the jungle dark means if he's not able to die, if he's respecting that much, they'll give you a lot of breathing room to get your farm and to have windows where you can join your team and look to start a fight. For the next example, visualize you're playing a team fighting champion. Let's say you're playing Scion or Cassante or Rumble, and you're versus a champion that can't keep you stuck under tower. Whether they want a team fight as well, or you've just one lane versus the Jax and you get pushed against them, in that situation, you want to be trying to reset your wave to either even or one wave past even. So let's say, for example, you've cleared both of these towers. From this point, you can reset your wave to even, or if you're stronger than him, you can get it one wave past even and just send it towards his tower. And even if it doesn't crash under the tower, you now have a window to pink this bush, and then use your green ward either here or here, depending on how much control you have. And then you're going to be looking to fog up and down the river, using the vision your pink denies, and looking to pressure the enemy team mid. And then it's important to note that if there's no fight happening mid, you don't just want to walk there all the way and start doing doughies if nothing's going to happen. You want to be getting back to your lane in time to catch the wave before it comes in and maintain pressure and maintain your control. Because if you run mid and try to do a fight that's unrealistic, if a fight's not going to break out, and your lane opponent can now, even though he should be losing to you on the side, or it's even to you in the side, he can now push your wave all the way under your tower and even clear all your vision, and now you have to respond to that. And during that time you're responding, if he's a team fighting champion, he can look to carry the game in his own way. But if you're realistic about fogging to mid and you see there's no way a fight's going to break out, you'd just stay hidden, and then you'd be back in time for your wave. And then if a fight is going to break out, let's say they're posturing for a Herald fight, you'll be there, you'll start a fight, and even though you'll lose your vision and your control of the side, you'll be able to secure the fight win for your team because you're creating a man advantage. Now, there will be some situations you run into later on in the game when side laning is not that important, and when it comes to that, you're going to be using your vision to secure a team fight victory. So to give an example, let's say you're playing Ornn vs Malphite, and 4th Dragon is spawning soon. You probably don't want to be pushing outside and making him react to you because he can just group with his team and look to either engage on your team or fully control that area of Dragon. So the way you want to be playing in that situation is you want to be grouping with your team early and looking to secure vision around the objective. And the way to do that is you need to be aware of the position of where your team is going to take this fight. So most of the time, when a team fight breaks out around Dragon, there will be 2 locations to fight. So one team will fight upriver and one team will fight downriver, and they'll basically have a standoff where they're staring at each other until someone makes a mistake and the fight breaks out. Now, it's important to know which one you're going to be standing in before you place your vision. So if you come before the enemy team, say they're taking late bases or the Malphite's catching a wave that you pushed earlier, then you can take top river, and it's better to be in top river because it gives you more options. And you can also catch the wave on the way. And if you decide that you don't want to do Dragon anymore, you can always turn onto the wave and run down mid and break the towers. So it is better to be top river if you can, but if you're arriving late, someone on your team greeted for an item, and they have full control of the area, you don't want to walk in and face check and get killed, then you can ping your team, hey, come join me in down river, and then you need to be placing your vision accordingly. So the way you want to be warding in this situation is you want to be splitting the map across like this, because if you don't do that, if you split it across the other river, there's going to be too many flank situations. And what I mean by that is when you split the map like this in your mind for your vision, you're going to be warding accordingly. So let's say, for example, your top river, you're going to be getting a ward here, ideally a pink, and then you'll be trying to get a ward here, either your blue trinket or your yellow trinket. And now there's no angle for the enemy team to flank. If they try to come through here, you can see them. If they try to come through here, you'll see them. And the only way they're going to flank is by getting very, very creative and doing a big dash around the back, but that's very, very rare, almost never happens, and when it does, you'll see them on the wave anyway, and you'll see them from this bush. So that flank very rarely can work, but it is an option. But for the most part, if you split the map like this across, and you control this bush and this bush, or even this one is fine too, you can basically see all flank avenues, and it's easier for your backline to play that out of the fight. And the same as if you're in the bot river situation, you'll be wanting to pink this bush, and this bush by blue. So now you have full vision, or even over the wall, it doesn't have to be a bush. But for the most part, you just want to be splitting the river across and then warding accordingly so that there's very little opportunities for a flank to break out. Now, the warding positions we just touched on is very important, especially later on in the game, once Baron is spawned and all the major dragons are spawning, the 4th dragon and the Elder. Because before that point, if you're playing a side lane champion, you need to have already solidified your advantage before the major objectives are spawning. If Baron itself is spawning, and you're playing Fiora or Tryndamere, and you can't break the tower, and you can't even get pushed in the side, you haven't played your champ correctly up until that point, or you need to adapt, and you probably just have to play for teamfights anyway, because if you answer side, you're catching a wave that the opponent top is pushed, and you're a weak team fighting champion, you're probably just going to be giving Baron for free if you can't really pressure any objectives. So if you know this vision, you get there ahead of time, even if your champion is weaker than the opponent's in team fights, if you have full control of the area and perfect vision down, then you could actually win the fights that you might otherwise lose. And to finish off, we'll go over the Baron vision, where if you're fighting downriver, you still want to be splitting the map across like this, where you need to be getting a ward over here or here, and then your other ward up here. And depending on what side you are, depends on where the pink should go. So if you're blue side, you should be warding either this one or here with the pink, because it's easier for you to defend. And if you're red side, you will pink this one, because it's easier to defend if you're red side. And then you place your yellow or blue on the opposite side, because even though it's hard to defend, you still need vision of that area to see if any flankers are approaching. And now if you are fighting upriver, it's the same situation, where you'll be warding either this bush or over the Baron wall if you want, and then your second ward will be over here or in the blue buff bush. And really the purpose of these wards, is to just see if any flankers are approaching, so that your backline can actually play the game without having to just think about where are these guys, I can't see them. If they can see the flanker approach, it's easier for them to make decisions, and there's a lot lower chance of them getting caught off guard and killed for free. Next we're going to be covering flank wards, and this section is very important if you play champs that are very good at flanking. So some examples of the McKinnon, Set, Vlad, where they're very strong at attacking the enemy team from behind, but they struggle a lot at running straight at them, because they don't really have any gap closers or tools that allow them to get into the middle of the enemy team, which is where they want to be. Of course, Kennen, Set, Vlad, they always want to dive into the middle of the enemy team, but the best way to do that is from flanking. And the best way to get flank wards is to plan out your flank ahead of time. You can't always rely on your team to just place the flank wards for you and you're like, oh, that looks pretty nice, I'll take that angle. That's not always going to happen. That's not a consistent option. So the best way to get flank wards is to plan out where you want to be fighting ahead of time. And that's pretty easy because you just press tab and see which neutral objective is spawning soon. And if you're playing a champ like Kennen or Vlad or Set, you'd mainly want to be team fighting anyway. So let's say, for example, you're playing Kennen and Dragon is spawning in 90 seconds. And your bot wave is here and both these towers are dead. You might want to push this wave here if you can. Let's say you're playing Kennen versus a tank or your lane opponent's gone missing. You basically want to push the wave to a point where someone has to answer it. And now when someone is answering the wave, you want to fog into their jungle and place a cheeky ward down. So now you've got a ward down around 60 seconds before Dragon spawns. You can base and get your item, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to be at the objective on time anymore because you've got your ward down. And it's important not to just ward in the obvious spots like in the bushes where the support's just going to run through with sweeper and check them. If you do a creative ward, for example, around wolves or even by Gromp or even around over this ramp, it's very hard for them to predict where their ward is going to be because sweeper lasts such a short amount of time now. So if you try to do a creative position for your ward ahead of time, it's going to be a lot higher chance of you getting a flank off. And then the enemy team comes in, they start dragging, and your team, even though you weren't there, they couldn't get control. They're okay to enter late because you're going to be TPing behind them. You got to run in and get a good Kennen ulti down. And now, even though your team is face checking into their vision, you've basically carried the fight because you planned ahead of time with your wave. You made someone answer it, and then while they're answering it, you got vision down in a creative spot in their jungle, and it led to you getting a really good flank off. And being able to learn this concept is very important, especially once Baron spawns, because if you can get a good flank ward before Baron's up and lead to your team getting Baron, you're definitely going to win more games. Because let's say, for example, you get a wave in and someone has to answer it, now you can get a ward in their jungle ahead of time with the Baron. And if you're in a game where you can't just get full pressure, or you're scared to walk into the jungle without dying, if you're scared of that, you don't have to get the best possible ward. Even if the best flank ward on paper might be here, so you have a lot of time to get behind them and, reposition and get the perfect flank off, that doesn't have to be the case every time. If they're too strong for you to walk in blindly without fear of being killed, you can get a cheeky little ward here or over here. It doesn't have to be the deepest flank possible. It just has to be in a position where you can get behind them. Because all of a sudden, if they see you here with your team clearing the wave, they're going to position more aggressively here and taking over this river. And now look, you can use these wards from before. So you can actually show your body to reposition the enemy team relative to where you are, because if they don't see a cannon fog of ward, they might be more likely to check bushes, sweep around their flanks, and really try to flush you out. But if they see you just hitting mid-wave, they might underestimate you, that even though 90 seconds in advance, you've gotten these creative flank wards down, you can still get the opportunity to get a flank off. Especially if you show on the map and it makes them reposition, it'll be a lot easier, but I'm just letting you know that you don't always have to be winning your side lane to get these flank wards off. You can always look for an angle to sneak a cheeky ward in, and even a shallow flank is better than no flank at all. To finish off, we'll be covering when to swap trinkets, because I see a lot of players make the mistake of either not swapping at all, or just swapping without thinking as soon as they can. When the yellow trinket can have a lot of value depending on which champion you're playing, and which the game state is, even in the mid to late game. Where if you're playing a champion that will simply be playing the side lane, the yellow trinket is best for taking over a side of the jungle, because the vision lasts longer than a blue trinket as long as they don't see it, and it's just a lot easier for them to clear a blue trinket, because they walk in the bush and whack it once and it's gone, whereas the yellow trinket, they have to commit their sweeper, they have to commit their body walking in, and they have to hit it down, where if you're playing a champion that's strong enough to punish their jungler 1v1 where he does that, it's going to be a lot harder for him to walk into his jungle and sweep it out. But if all he has to do is walk in, whack the blue trinket and walk away without committing anything, it's a lot easier for him to retake his jungle slowly. And the red trinket is very, very good on flank champions, of course, but there are some situations where you'll keep yellow, like we just touched on, where you want to be planning out your flank ahead of time and getting these wards down. And then once you've placed your flank ward, let's say a minute before dragon at base, you can actually swap to sweeper then. And you won't be able to use both within that time period, but the sweeper will come up eventually when you don't have TP, and then you'll be able to look for a future flank with that. Because when you're playing a flank champion, the sweeper is best for looking for flanks when you're already at the objective on time, or if you're getting there early. The yellow trinket, you're looking for TP flanks by yourself, is pretty niche. Of course, you normally want your teammates to be doing it, but there are situations where it's good. But the situations where it's hard for you to get vision ahead of time, let's just say if you walk in the side lane, you're going to get killed straight away by their 20 kill Kane or something, then of course you just need to be looking to flank with your sweeper, which will serve its purpose. But the yellow trinket does have that option where if you are able to win this side and push it without fear of being killed easily, then you can get your own flank wards and you won't even need the sweeper in the first place. And the blue trinket is of course very, very good for controlling a jungle still when you feel unsafe. If you walk into that jungle and you feel like the enemy jungler, if he's in there, he's just going to beat you, he's just going to easily kill you, then of course you need to be getting your vision down from safety before you walk in. and getting your pink down. So the blue trinket's good in that situation, and it's also very, very good on long range champs such as Jace or Gangplank, where you want to be seeing them before you look to hit your poke. And also on those champs, you're so squishy, you're vulnerable to dying anyway. You don't really want to be walking into a jungle and getting down control. You want to be doing it from safety so you can get your range down without any fear of being killed. And some extra uses of these wards is, of course, with the yellow trinket, you can jump to it if you're playing a champ like Jax or even Lee Sin top if you wanted to. And with the sweeper, you can spot champions such as Akali, you can spot Teemo Shroom, you can spot Teemo Invisibility. It's very, very good against those two champions. I normally buy that really early on with them, especially around level 6, where you really want to be seeing Akali and Teemo Shrooms. And then with the blue trinket, it's very good at spotting flankers, because if you're unable to get vision down ahead of time, or let's say your teammate does and the flanker sweeps it out, then you can look to spot him. Or if you've got some light vision down but not enough vision to really see all angles, then the blue trinket can be really good at filling in the gaps without leaving your position. If you're playing a champion like Ornn, where you ideally want to be with your team looking to engage, you don't really want to be running through the jungle dropping a ward if you haven't done so ahead of time, if you made that mistake. And in that situation, you can use the blue trinket to easily basically close the gap. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap it up there, and I know there's a lot to unpack from this video, but there's one main thing I want you all to take away, and that is using your wards with intention, and reviewing the wards you put down to see how you can be doing better, because at the end of the day, that is the best way to improve upon it, where you don't need to be relying on even this guide or other guides you might watch. If you're just reviewing all of your wards and seeing what works and what doesn't, then you're going to be a lot better at warding overall. Even if you don't know technically on paper the best spots to place your wards at all points in the game, you'll know what works for you and what doesn't, and you'll improve upon it as you go. So I'll leave it at there, and I'll catch you guys later.